Welcome to a debate in the race for Pennsylvania's 17th Congressional District from the studio of KDKA-TV.
Hello and welcome to KDKA's debate between the candidates in Pennsylvania's 17th Congressional District. I'm KDKA News anchor Ken Rice. I'll be serving as moderator. Let's welcome the candidates. Chris DeLuzio, the Democratic candidate, and Jeremy Shaffer, the Republican candidate. I'll be joined in questioning the candidates by my fellow KDKA News anchor John Shumway and KDKA Director of Community Impact Lisa Smith. Our political editor John Delano helped arrange this debate. He was supposed to be part of our panel. Unfortunately, John is under the weather. Here are the rules for the debate. The candidates will have 1 minute for answers and an additional 30 seconds for rebuttals. The questioners may jump in with follow-ups if they feel it's appropriate to do so, and we'll make sure the response times are fair. And finally, each candidate will be given 90 seconds to deliver a closing statement. And so let's begin. Mr. Shaffer, the question goes to you first. Both of your campaigns are benefiting from financial support from your national parties. So tell voters what you disagree with your party on, whether positions on certain issues or perhaps your party's nominees for U.S. Senate and governor, or your party's leader in the House, in your case, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah. First, let me say thank you so much to KDKA. Thank you, Ken, Lisa, and John, for having us here. I think it's important for the voters in this district, in Allegheny and Beaver County, to be able to hear from us, the candidates, on the important issues. Right now, the system is broken. I'm a big believer in fixing a broken Congress, and both parties are at fault. I believe we need term limits. We need campaign finance reform. We need to end gerrymandering. Part of the issue you just brought up is the enormous amount of money that both national parties and super PACs have been dumping into this race. That's really not good for democracy, and it's something that we need to end. I've always been a bipartisan problem solver. I'm an engineer. I like to get to the root cause of the problem. I've stood up to my own party numerous times before, and I was elected as a Ross Township Commissioner by a bipartisan majority, even when the Democrats were a majority on the Ross Township Board. One recent issue where I disagreed with my party was on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I publicly supported the bipartisan infrastructure bill because I know the importance of roads and bridges. And that's something that I was criticized for in the Republican primary.
Let me just follow up with asking for a couple of specifics here. Are you supporting your fellow nominee for U.S. Senate, Mehmet Oz?
You know, look, I am laser focused on my own race. I'm happy to answer questions about my race. We have enough problems in D.C. with Nancy Pelosi in control of Congress.
Are you supporting?
You know, I'm not going to go down the bunny trails of do I support this candidate or do I support that candidate. I have always been my own person. I will always support my own issues, and I'll stand up to my party when it's appropriate. And I think voters saw the debate last night between Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman, and voters are capable of making a choice between which one of the two of them they should support.
Mr. DeLuzio, what do you disagree with your party on issues, fellow nominees, Speaker Nancy Pelosi?
Ken, thank you again for being here and having us here for an important debate about our congressional district and what we ought to see in representation in Washington. I'm someone who grew up right here in Western Pennsylvania, went off to the Naval Academy after the 9/11 attacks of my senior year of high school. Committed to keeping this country safe, serving this country in uniform, fighting for our democracy in my time after the uniform, and fighting for a union. I'm someone who understands deeply, because I've lived the values of putting this country first above party. I'll do it in Washington. I'll be proud to join the For Country caucus alongside veterans of both parties. And look, I've been pretty clear and crystal clear criticizing this current administration, which has been debating, frankly, whether they might roll back tariffs against China. I think it'd be a terrible mistake. I've said that publicly. I'll say it here in this debate. We ought to be doing everything we can to bring our manufacturing and our jobs back home, back to Western Pennsylvania, not giving the Chinese an excuse to undercut us and take our factories. And frankly, my opponent's business has been doing work to help the communist Chinese build out their own infrastructure.
Are you voting for and supporting John Fetterman?
And I'll happily answer the question that Mr. Shaffer just ducked from you, Ken. Yes, I am supporting Mr. Fetterman.
And Josh Shapiro for governor.
And I'll also answer the question that Mr. Shaffer ducked as well. I'm proud to be supporting Josh Shapiro for governor as well.
Nancy Pelosi, Speaker.
I don't know who's going to be running to lead the Democratic caucus. The last thing I'll be doing is giving up any leverage I'll have to get the best deal I possibly can for Western Pennsylvania.
Mr. Shaffer, 30 seconds to you.
Yes, look, there has been so many untruths told in this race. I was born to teenage parents. I always had to work hard in my life. I came from very modest means. I got a fellowship to go to Carnegie Mellon University. I started a company here in Western Pennsylvania with my good friend in our apartment at Carnegie Mellon University. Every single job that my company had was created here in Western Pennsylvania. And the group that my company evolved into, when we sold it to another company, every single job has stayed here in Western Pennsylvania. I've never sold any bridge software to China, and it's an absolute lie.
Jeremy, Mr. DeLuzio,
that is perfectly true. You can look it up. My company is
Jeremy,
Tech. Every
your
job
time is
was
up,
here
Mr. Shaffer.
in the U.S.
Mr. DeLuzio, you have 30 seconds.
Mr. Shaffer, it's not true. Your company has been building infrastructure in communist China. You've helped them build bridges, roads, highways. You've helped them build their nuclear power facilities. That is selling out Western Pennsylvania workers. You've been an executive at this company for a decade. You've made millions. You've cashed in stock options to fund this campaign from that money. Just be honest with folks about it.
All right, we're going to move on. We're going to go now to John Shumway. John.
Gentlemen, let's talk about policing for a minute. Mr. DeLuzio, we are nearing, what is it, almost 100 homicides in Allegheny County this year alone. Now, your opponent says that you want to defund the police, and he links you to progressives like AOC and Summer Lee, saying that you have actually donated to their campaigns. You've responded by saying that Mr. Shaffer is lying. So let's get to the bottom of it. Have you donated to AOC and Summer Lee? And what exactly is your view on funding the police?
John, thanks for the question. I, of course, don't support defunding the police. Look, I'm the only person on this stage who's worn a uniform, carried a gun in a dangerous place to keep us safe. I know what it is that folks go through who risk their lives to protect us. I'm proud to be endorsed by unions representing cops, firefighters, prosecutors, those who do the work to protect us. And I know they need the resources that I'm going to fight for in Washington to frankly deliver for local departments across our district who need resources and training to keep us safe. I'm a parent of young children. Every parent around here knows they want to have their kids feel safe and know that they're secure going out in the world. I'll be fighting for that, those resources. And frankly, I don't need a lecture from a corporate executive about what it is to put yourself in harm's way.
Mr. Shaffer, you have said that you oppose defunding the police. And in the wake of what we saw with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, there's a lot of talk about moving resources over to community policing. So how would you handle that? Where would you find the money to do community policing without, quote unquote, defunding the police?
First, let me say my opponent, Chris DeLuzio, he did not answer your question. He has directly donated money to AOC. He's directly donated money to Summer Lee and to Bernie Sanders, people who are part of the Progressive Caucus who want to defund the police. He just held a fundraiser in Philadelphia with the head of the Progressive Caucus, who's actively been advocating for defunding the police. This is one reason that every single one of the Fraternal Order of Polices in our district has endorsed me. Why I'm endorsed by Beaver County Sheriff Tony Guy and endorsed by Beaver County District Attorney Dave Lozier. And look, this isn't an either-or choice. I was a Ross Township Commissioner. We had a 40-person police force. You can invest in the police and support the police, and you can also invest in community development. You can do both, and we must do both. Our communities are suffering from record crime. And this is a direct result of progressives. I want to be part of the bipartisan caucus, the Problem Solvers Caucus in D.C. My opponent's already lined himself with the far left-wing caucus in his own party.
Mr. Shaffer, thank you. Mr. DeLuzio, 30 seconds.
Sure. Look, let's talk about Mr. Shaffer's donations. This guy's given thousands of dollars, thousands, to extremist groups, guns groups that oppose every single measure of common sense gun reform to keep my kids and your kids safe. He's given thousands of dollars, thousands, to groups that want to ban, that want to get rid of prevailing wage laws in this country, that want to take away protections for pre-existing conditions and jam an anti-union right-to-work law down our throats. So let's talk about donations. He's donated thousands to these extremist groups.
And since you brought up guns, let's talk about that for just a second. Mr. Shaffer, I'll start with you. And that is, I mean, we saw what happened in St. Louis this week. Of course, we're in this anniversary week for Tree of Life. Would you support returning to a ban on assault weapons in Congress? And if so, by the way, can you tell us whatever weapons you might have?
Yeah. So I'm an engineer. I always want to get to the root cause of the problem. We have violence that is plaguing our communities. We just had a shooting yesterday in front of Kappa, right down the road. We had shootings right across from on the north side, the Giant Eagle that I've gone to many times. We need to get the root cause. I'm in favor of keeping any type of gun out of the hands of violent criminals, out of the hands of people who are making threats, out of the hands of people who are mentally unstable. We need to enforce our background checks, and if there is any weapon that's an automatic weapon that is more deadly than a normal gun, then yes, I'm in favor of banning it.
All right, Mr. DeLuzio?
Well, he didn't quite answer the question because automatic weapons have been illegal in this country for a long time. I assume you know that, Jeremy. Look, the weapons of war that my friends and I carried in Iraq, we had the best training in the world. They were designed to swiftly and efficiently kill people in battle. They don't belong in our schools, our churches, our streets. I think an 18-year-old with no training should not be able to go buy an AR-15 and a high-capacity magazine. That's a pretty direct answer, and that's what we ought to do to keep our communities safe. That's the courage you need in Washington. And I'll work with Democrats and Republicans who are willing to do that and willing to take the tough stands to keep us safe.
Neither of you answered the second part of the question, so let me go back to Mr. DeLuzio. Do you own any weapons?
I do not.
I own a shotgun and a rifle I use for hunting.
Okay, thank you. Lisa?
All right. So our next question is for both candidates. We're going to begin with an answer from Mr. Shaffer. Last year, a resolution was introduced in the House of Representatives that said, in part, critical race theory serves as a prejudicial ideological tool rather than an educational tool and should not be taught in K through 12 classrooms as a way to teach students to judge individuals based on sex, race, ethnicity, and national origin. In your view, what is critical race theory? Do you have direct knowledge of it being taught in any K through 12 classroom? And would you prohibit its teaching as a member of Congress? Mr. Shaffer.
Yes, look, I think the most critical part of your question was probably the very last part. I'm a small government person. I believe that we don't need the heavy hand of the federal government in many different areas of our lives, that ultimately we need to empower our local school boards and the local parents to be able to make those decisions. I'm certainly not in favor of critical race theory. I believe we need to come together as a country, that we need to value each person regardless of their race, regardless of their natural abilities or any disabilities that they may have, that we all have an equality of worth, and that's what we should be teaching. And critical race theory basically teaches people to who is the oppressor, who is the oppressed. I don't believe that's what we should do, but I also don't believe that it is the federal government's job, it is not Congress's job to dictate local school curriculums. And that will be up to our local school boards, which are elected here in Pennsylvania, and the parents in the local school districts to make those decisions.
Mr. DeLuzio.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And look, I think I'm a parent of young children. I know Jeremy is as well. So many folks watching have children going through schools or preparing to go to school. You want to have a say on what your kid's taught, and that's your basic right, I think, as a parent. The last thing you need is Congress telling you and everyone else across the country what your local school should be teaching. That's not Congress's job. Congress can support schools with the resources they need and frankly, the support as they did provide during the pandemic to get kids back to school, to make sure that schools have what they need to get kids prepared for the economy of today and the economy of tomorrow. That's the job in Congress. It's not to go fight culture war battles or dictate to parents what their kids are taught in school. That's certainly not what I'll be doing in Congress. That's not the job of Washington.
As far as a definition of critical race theory, what would you say that is?
Well, look, I think folks argue all the time about what this might mean. To me, as I understand the question, you're talking about teaching kids, whatever age, about different types of racial discrimination or gender discrimination, whatever the case may be. But as I understand, the right has weaponized this into some sort of culture war fight. And of course, we should understand our history. We should understand the people around us. But the type of divisive rhetoric I hear out of the right is not something that we should be legislating from in Washington.
A rebuttal, Mr. Shaffer.
Look, we need to, I have 5 kids, and that we need to be teaching our children to love this country. That doesn't mean that our country is not without mistakes. Unfortunately, critical race theory all too often tells us that this country was built on evil, a foundational evil. Look, we have moved forward so much in this country. I love this country. This is the best country in the history of the world. And critical race theory is really designed by academic elites to try to divide this country and to put us into little boxes based on our race, our gender, or any other orientation that we have. To me, that's not a good thing.
A final word, Mr. DeLuzio.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
A final rebuttal.
Oh, well, look, I'm someone who believes deeply in this country. Obviously, I risked my life for our freedom here. And the last thing I'm teaching my children is they should do anything but love this country. They should. It's a country that I'm proud of, I think folks in Western Pennsylvania understand the value of service and patriotism and loving this country.
All right, Mr. DeLuzio, I'll direct this next question to you first. More than a year ago, President Biden was saying that inflation would be temporary, dismissing concerns that we might be in for persistent price hikes. Around the same time, his Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, said inflation posed only a small risk, and then a year later she admitted she got it wrong. What could they have done differently, and what would you do now to bring down these high prices that we're all paying?
Look, people are feeling the pain every day, from housing to healthcare costs, gas to groceries. Costs are going up. It's going up across the planet. We're seeing rates well in excess of our rates here in this country, in Europe, for instance. And we have some things we can be doing, right? This Congress has just passed a law to allow Medicare to finally negotiate drug prices to bring down costs for seniors. Republicans and Mr. Shaffer are opposed to that. They don't want that change. But we're not going to bring down costs if we aren't serious about bringing back our manufacturing, stretching these supply chains. We never should have signed these lousy trade deals that shipped our jobs to Mexico and to China, and allow these corporations to rip us off, chasing the cheapest labor they can find. We've got to stand up against 70-year record profits where they're gouging folks, especially in industries where they have the most consolidation, and we've got to bring these jobs back. We can't just keep sending corporate executives and people doing their bidding to Congress who are shipping our jobs to China. It doesn't make sense.
Mr. Shaffer.
Look, you're exactly right, Ken. The liberal left wanted us to believe that we could throw trillions of dollars after liberal priorities into the economy and that we wouldn't have any inflation. The people that Chris DeLuzio was supporting, AOC, Bernie Sanders, wanted to spend trillions and trillions of more dollars. Had it not been for Joe Manchin, we would have inflation at 20%, not just 10%. I was just talking to people in Moon Township yesterday. They're struggling right now, having to decide between gas and groceries and where to spend money. And winter's coming. Gas and energy prices are rising. This is a problem of the left's own making. We need to balance our budget. As a Ross Township commissioner, I balanced our budget with Democrats and Republicans. I balanced my budget in my own small business. We need to balance our budget, and we need to increase domestic energy production. One of the first things, my opponent, Chris DeLuzio, his progressive group wants to implement the Green New Deal. If you're happy with $4 gas, wait till it gets to $10 gas.
Time is up.
That's what we'll
Mr. DeLuzio, you have 30 seconds.
And what Mr. Shaffer didn't offer is a solution because he doesn't have one. In fact, what they want to do is to continue to slash taxes for corporations. He signed a pledge to not even raise taxes on any company. Amazon, which pays less taxes than any person watching this, he wants to keep their taxes low and will probably cut them. They're talking about targeting Medicare and Social Security benefits, and they're not going to stand up to the corporations who've been shipping our jobs and our factories overseas, because that's who pays their bills, that's who funds their campaigns, who funds their party. They're so weak, they won't stand up to big pharma to even get to negotiate drug prices.
Mr. Shaffer,
so that's simply
not
true.
Mr. Shaffer, 30
I am
seconds.
in favor of a minimum tax for corporations. Every corporation should have to pay a minimum tax. To me, it's absolutely ridiculous that Amazon, that these companies don't pay any tax. Look, Mr. DeLuzio was a delegate for a socialist, for Bernie Sanders. Socialism and crony capitalism are two sides of the same bad coin. We cannot have big government spending. We cannot have monopolies and duopolies. I want to support small businesses, which is why I'm endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses.
Time's
when
up.
I had my own
Ken,
company,
I'd like to
I paid far more taxes
We are moving on.
Than Amazon.
We are moving on. Next question, John Shumway.
Let's turn to January 6th for a few minutes here. Obviously, we all know about the deadly assault on the Capitol and the people who died there, all designed to prevent the votes for president from being counted. 928 people so far have been charged in the insurrection. Now, Mr. Shaffer, your opponent and his allies have linked you to the views of President Trump. They've also linked you to the views of the nominee for governor here in Pennsylvania, who was there on January the 6th, claiming you're an extremist, and when it comes to protecting our democracy, that's where you fall. So here's the question. Do you minimize, as they have, what happened on January 6th? What is your position about the legitimacy of the 2020 election? And how do you assess the job, the special House committee looking into and investigating what happened there? And if you're elected, would you vote to continue that committee's work?
Look, every time I buy gas and groceries, when I see a newspaper article that says We had the largest number ever in the history of this country of illegal immigrants that poured across our southern border. I can tell you with 110% certainty that Joe Biden is our president and that he won the election. And that is what we have to deal with right now. I'm laser focused on trying to solve this problem with both parties so that we can reduce inflation, so that we can get our budget balanced. And that's what we need to be looking forwards, not backwards. I was criticized in my own party's primary for saying that I would have voted for the Pennsylvania electors, which would put me in the minority of my own party. We have a criminal justice system in this country, and anyone who commits a criminal act, whether it's storming the Capitol, whether it's being part of an Antifa riot, or some other criminal act, they should face the justice system. We have a functioning legal system, and that's where it should be. We should have to have primetime hearings on inflation, on the drug crisis, on our open southern border. That's what Congress should be focused on right now.
Would you continue the work? Would you vote to continue the work of the House Select Committee?
No, our Justice Department should be doing that investigation. The House Select Committee was a made-for-TV exercise. It actually got in the way of the Justice Department doing their own investigation. If crimes were committed, they should go through the normal legal process. We have functioning legal systems in this country, and that is what should be used to prosecute any violations of the law.
If crimes were committed, Jeremy, they stormed the Capitol and tried to overthrow our Constitution. They tried to destroy our government. These are people who went with bats and pipes and beat up cops and tried to install Donald Trump as president after he lost the election. You're not sure whether there were crimes committed?
So, Mr. DeLuzio, based on these answers, would you still consider your opponent to be an extremist?
I do. Here's the basic fact. Donald Trump led an insurrection that Doug Mastriano attended at the Capitol, attacking the government that I swore an oath to defend, that we all swear when we serve in Congress or anywhere else to protect. Jeremy Shaffer went on television and asked Donald Trump for an endorsement, said he'd be honored to have his endorsement. This is a man, whatever your politics might be, who tried to overthrow our government. He's been palling around, campaigning with, having support from and endorsements from insurrectionists, people who voted in Congress to throw out our votes. He had Kevin McCarthy in this district, a man who voted to throw out our election. So yes, I think he's a threat.
And the House Select Committee is
going
going to come out
in
just a second. Your time's in just a second. The House Select Committee is going to come out with some recommendations for things that should be done. What do you think should be done?
Look, we can legislate certain things. We should improve the Electoral Count Act so we can't have the kinds of shenanigans that the Republicans were playing last election, the Electoral College count. We should strengthen the Voting Rights Act and so much more. What I can't legislate is what's in the heart of Republican candidates like Jeremy and others who are eroding the norms and the rule of law and are willing to stand by because they lack the courage when there is someone like Donald Trump who is trying to overthrow our government. I can't legislate that change.
30-second response.
So I kind of feel like whiplash here. In the Republican primary, I was attacked for not supporting some of the very views that I'm being criticized for right now. I am pleased to be endorsed by numerous Democrat elected officials, by many independents, and by Republicans from all over the political spectrum. I'm endorsed by Pat Toomey. Pat Toomey, someone who obviously stood up to Donald Trump. And I'm also supported by conservatives because people know that our country is headed in the wrong direction. We need to put this divisiveness behind us and fix the big problems that are going on in Congress.
Well, we can't move past this when you have Donald Trump this week saying he's going to use the 2022 election in Pennsylvania as a dress rehearsal for his attack on our democracy in 2024. You have to confront this, Jeremy, whether you like it or not. And let's talk about Pat Toomey. Pat Toomey did one of the most deplorable things I've seen out of a senator in my lifetime when he blocked the PACT Act, did everything he could to block aid for veterans like me who were exposed to burn pits in places like Iraq, a guy who voted to send us off to fight that war and suddenly is counting pennies when it's time to take care of the veterans who answered the call. I'd be ashamed to have his support.
My wife and her family lived at Camp Lejeune. She's the daughter of a career Marine. I fully support defending our veterans and funding them when they face burn pits or bad water in different places. But look, you're accusing me of being extremist, which is far from the truth. I have a record. I've served on local library boards. I've defended all the books being able to be in the libraries, which my own party criticized me for. I was elected by bipartisan majority on a majority Democrat board as a Ross Township commissioner. I want to put this partisanship aside. I want to solve the problems in D.C., and this divisive language is just ridiculous.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, on that topic. Lisa?
Let's now turn to abortion. Mr. DeLuzio, in light of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to reverse Roe versus Wade, do you believe that the High Court made the right decision? Why or why not?
Thank you for the question. As you can imagine, I hear from people, and women especially in this district, Republicans, independents, Democrats, who are furious at what the Supreme Court did. I don't agree with the decision to overturn decades of precedent in Roe v. Wade to take away reproductive freedom from people. I'll be fighting in Washington to protect those rights, signing a law, voting for a law that will restore Roe v. Wade under federal law. My opponent is opposed to abortion. He's supported bans nationally. He's done it in writing and questionnaires. He's opposed exceptions for rape and incest. He's campaigned alongside Doug Mastriano, who is threatening to put women and their doctors in prison. This extremism is wildly out of touch and it's dangerous. I have young daughters. I do not want Jeremy Shaffer having a say on their reproductive choices. I don't want Doug Mastriano to have a say either.
Mr. Shaffer?
So look, Chris DeLuzio is being delusional again here. You can pull up debates that I was in 4 years ago, and you can be able to see clearly when I answered the League of Women Voters that I say, yes, I am pro-life, and I favor exceptions for life, rape, and incest. I also was attacked once again in my own Republican primary because I stated that it is not the role of the federal government to decide abortion, but it's the role of the individual states. I've answered that same way on other educational issues. I believe that ultimately the Constitution is very clear that it's up to the states to decide their role on the laws affecting abortion. I believe my opponent's position is the radical one. He supports what the House Democrats tried to do, which was to put into law that you would have taxpayer-funded federal abortion, and that would be available up until the moment of birth. That's a radical position. I believe that we should put it back to the states, which is what our Constitution says.
So Jeremy just lied to all of you. So he's written his answer in questionnaires in this election and his prior one.
You can look at the tape from 4 years ago. You can look at the tape 4 years ago and you can see the answer.
It's my turn to speak. I'd appreciate if you'd wait your turn. I know it's difficult. He's done it in questionnaires opposing rape and incest victims having access to abortion. He's done it in this election, calling for Congress to restrict abortion. He's called for federal bans. And let's also be clear. He talks about sending to the states. Doug Mastriano is the gubernatorial nominee of his party in Pennsylvania. Doug Mastriano wants to criminalize abortion with no exceptions and put women and doctors in prison.
Mr. Shaffer, can we ask directly, in the past you have talked about Congress having a constitutional amendment to ban abortions with, I guess, the exception for the mother's life. Is that still your position?
So what I said in the Republican debate in the primary was that Congress does not have the power under the U.S. Constitution to make abortion legal or to make it illegal. And that if we wanted to change that in either direction, it would have to be done through a constitutional amendment. You can listen to the exact words. I didn't even actually say what the constitutional amendment would be, but I said that since Congress does not have the power to do that, and since it's reserved to the states, it would have to be done through a constitutional amendment.
So what would that constitutional amendment look like that you would support?
So I'm not openly supporting any constitutional amendment right now. I believe that the right place for it to do would be in the states, and that's where it should be done.
And just to be clear, the person running for governor in his party in this state, in Pennsylvania, is Doug Mastriano, with whom he's campaigned as an office in Beaver County, who wants to ban abortion without exceptions, wants to threaten prison time for doctors and women. That's the decision he wants to kick to Pennsylvania, right to Doug Mastriano's desk.
So look, my wife is a doctor. I do not believe that doctors should be put into prison for abortion or for other actions. That's just a ridiculous statement. I've made my point very clear. I'm in favor of exceptions for life, rape, and incest, and I believe that that decision should be up to the individual states, whoever the voters of Pennsylvania decide.
Jeremy, you're not being honest about what you've said in questionnaires time and again, including in this election when you've called for congressional action to limit abortion. Just be honest with people.
I don't believe that federal money should be funded for abortion.
Jeremy, I'm still speaking. Again, I know it's hard for you. You should be honest with folks. You've taken this position, you've done it in writing. Now the politics are bad for you and you're lying through your teeth to get elected. Just be honest with people.
All right, thank you. We are going to pause now for a quick break. More of this KDKA debate in the 17th Congressional District right after this. Welcome back to KDKA's debate between the candidates for Pennsylvania's 17th Congressional District, Republican Jeremy Shaffer and Democrat Chris DeLuzio. Next question, Mr. Shaffer, will go to you first. The district that you're seeking to represent is seeing the startup of an operation, a major industrial operation, bringing hundreds of badly needed jobs, but also using fossil fuels from fracking to produce plastic pellets. You both say you want to protect the environment, fight climate change, limit climate change. So would you have supported greenlighting the Shell ethane cracker plant? And if so, how is that consistent with your commitment to protect the environment and reduce climate change?
Absolutely, yes. Look, it is ridiculous that Joe Biden has to go over to Saudi Arabia and fist bump a foreign dictator and beg him to produce more energy. When we in Western Pennsylvania have one of the world's largest energy reserves beneath our feet. We have the Marcellus Shale, even bigger than Saudi Arabia's energy reserves. We can provide tens of thousands of high-paying jobs to workers here in Western Pennsylvania and do it in a way that helps our environment and our economy. I'm an electrical engineer. I can tell you all about the electrical grid. The foundation of our economy is based on affordable, reliable energy. And if we were able to be energy dominant, we could be able to reduce Russia's geopolitical influence. We could be able to power the world. And if the world was using natural gas from Western Pennsylvania, we would actually cut CO2 emissions by over 50%. This is a win-win-win solution. My opponent and his leftist friends that he's supporting with the Green New Deal want to shut it all down.
Time's up. Mr. DeLuzio.
Yeah, absolutely support the investment. I'm proud to be endorsed by the workers whose livelihoods depend on our energy economy, who built the cracker plant, the building trades, from steam fitters to boilermakers, plumbers, you name it. All of those unions who endorse Republicans and Democrats have all endorsed me in this race. They know I'm committed to the union way of life, of course, but to building and protecting those jobs. And we've got to have energy security here. Beyond natural gas, which we are a major source of, we also have a strong nuclear facility in our district, providing reliable power to the grid. I look over to Europe. I see them decarbonizing too fast. I see them walking away from their nuclear sector. I see them reliant on Russian exports of oil and gas, staring down a depression, funding Russia's militarism. It's a mistake. And it's curious for me to hear Mr. Shaffer mention Saudi Arabia, another country that his business has been helping build infrastructure, a country through OPEC who's taking dead aim at Americans' wallets, messing with global oil supply. It's the same kind of corporate sell-off stuff we do not need in Washington.
So Chris DeLuzio is being delusional yet again here. I had a 40-person small business here in Western Pennsylvania. Never did any work in Saudi Arabia. I've never even been to Saudi Arabia. And look, he is directly funding candidates and wants to be part of the House Progressive Caucus that supports the Green New Deal. So he can say all he wants here, but the leftist group that he wants to be part of directly wants to shut down our energy industry in Western Pennsylvania.
So Jeremy lied to you again, folks. He's been an executive at this company for a decade. He sold out his company to them, has stayed on, made millions, has stock. They've been doing business all over the world, coddling our adversaries, like Communist China, like Saudi Arabia. If you think Saudi Arabia is your friend, you're wrong. They're messing with us at OPEC. They're messing with gas prices. And they're messing with global oil supply. And his company does business with them. That's the reality.
Okay, so I think we're done. We're done. I'm sorry. We're done on this subject because we have a lot more topics to get to. John Shumway, over to you.
You know, in just the past few minutes, gentlemen, we've heard delusional and we've heard liar going back and forth. You know, it wasn't that long ago where there was a spirit of cooperation on Capitol Hill, where despite political differences, the two sides could come together in bipartisanship and actually get things done. The electorate is totally frustrated with what they see coming out of Washington, the inability of the two sides to sit down and talk. So, Mr. DeLuzio, we'll start with you. What would you do on Capitol Hill to cross that aisle, to be able to work with people on the other side, especially if your party leadership is saying,
I love the question, John, and very much appreciate it. I come into politics. I've not run 4 times. I come into this from public service. I come to this from someone who wore the uniform and led Americans in Iraq and at sea. I understand what it is to put this country first, to put this region first. I've committed. I'll join the 4-country caucus made up of Democrats and Republicans who've worn the uniform, who've served, who work across the aisle and meet with frequency and pass bills. And they've had great success on things from Veterans Affairs to defense measures and so much more. It is important that we can find places to work together. I wish there were more of them. The bipartisan infrastructure package is one, the CHIPS Act, the gun reform package. The PACT Act, many of these bills with overwhelming Democratic support, at best we get 5–10% Republicans supporting them. These are popular measures. People expect us to work together. I come to this from public service as someone who always puts this country first, and I'll do it in Washington every day.
Mr. Shaffer, your view on this?
Look, as an engineer, I look at the root cause of what's going on in D.C. Our system is broken. I'm 45 years old. There have been people in both parties that have been serving in Congress for longer than I've been alive. I'm a big believer in term limits. We need term limits to make sure that people come back and listen to their constituents and go on with their life. We need campaign finance reform to take the big money out of politics. We need to end egregious gerrymandering that's pushing the extremes on both sides. I've been a commissioner elected by Republicans and Democrats. I've won Democratic primaries before. What Chris DeLuzio doesn't tell you is that he voted against his own party's platform because he didn't think it was leftist enough. He was a delegate for Bernie Sanders. He has aligned himself with the most left-wing part of his party, and he said it's his mission to try to pull Joe Biden to the left. I think we need a middle-out approach to government. I'm looking forward to be part of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats dedicated to solving the big problems in D.C.
30 seconds, Mr. DeLuzio.
Sure, if Jeremy's worried about extremism, the first thing he could do is stop campaigning with people who tried to overthrow our election. Stop having Kevin McCarthy come to Western Pennsylvania. Refuse the money and support from the insurrectionists who've given you money and endorsed you. You won't find a single insurrectionist supporting me because I wouldn't welcome their support. I risked my life for this country, as lots of Americans did, as lots of folks in Western Pennsylvania have done, and we don't need people who are willing to provide comfort to those who would tear down our government serving in Congress.
Last word on this, Mr. Shaffer.
Look, we desperately need to come together as a country. We are tearing ourselves apart while China and Russia can just sit on the sidelines and watch this going on. I have a proven track record of working with Republicans and Democrats in local government and getting things done. In Ross Township, we work together to improve our local community, to improve our roads, to improve our bridges, to make our police strong, to keep it safe, and even to cut some taxes while prioritizing our needs. This isn't rocket science. We can get it done, and I will get it done in D.C.
Thank you. Lisa?
Gentlemen, our next question is on voting laws. Communities of color tend to be negatively impacted by restrictive voting laws. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court is expected to rule on whether or not county election officials should count a mail-in ballot that is received on time, but without a written date on the return envelopes. What is your position? Should these ballots in undated returned envelopes be counted as long as they are received by election day? Mr. Shaffer.
Yeah. Look, well, I think you mentioned some critical parts of law. Election law is really handled by the individual states. And so you mentioned the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania Legislature, the Pennsylvania Governor, all those positions that I am not running for. I do believe that we should have elections that are fair and free. We should have security around them. We should make sure that every vote that's legally cast should be counted. I personally am fine that if a vote is received before the election day, that vote should count.
All right. Mr. DeLuzio.
I think if folks return their ballot by the time prescribed in the law, it's received, it ought to count. We have a protection in this country and a presumption that when your ballot is cast fairly, correctly, and you're eligible, we count the vote. And the first part of your question talks about barriers to voting for folks. You know, I'm someone who's worked as a lawyer to protect voting rights. We were doing this work in a bipartisan fashion for years. The Voting Rights Act used to be passed with huge majorities in the Congress. President George W. Bush signed a reauthorization. This has somehow become a partisan football for one reason. Republicans won't support it. They won't vote for the reauthorization, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, to bring back the same protections essentially that we had since the 1960s to protect folks' voting rights, especially in communities of color. This is not a partisan problem, it's an American one, and I wish the Republicans would get back on board to doing what's right to protect voting rights.
Mr. Shaffer, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm 110% in favor. Look, we need to make sure that everyone has access to voting. I've said that in the past. I've worked as a Ross Township Commissioner to make our voting places as accessible and open as possible. On election day, no one should be disenfranchised. I would work with Republicans and Democrats to make sure that we have a free, fair election with security to make sure that there's no shenanigans that happen.
30 seconds, Mr. DeLuzio.
Mr. Shaffer really didn't answer the question, and frankly, This is someone who's been campaigning with election deniers, who has a campaign office with Doug Mastriano in Beaver County, who's brought election deniers like Kevin McCarthy to this district. These are the people who are undermining elections, undermining our faith in democracy, who tried to overthrow our government on January 6th. That's the reality. And you can say all the words you want about being bipartisan. The most bipartisan thing in the world is to be committed to this government and to not provide comfort and campaign alongside those who would tear it down.
Thank you.
All right, time now for one more quick break. We'll be right back. All right, continuing now with KDKA's debate between the candidates for U.S. House in Pennsylvania's 17th District. Next question, Mr. DeLuzio, begins with you. What have we learned about how to handle the next public health crisis from the COVID pandemic and the government response to it? The painful business shutdowns and school closings, but also more than 1 million COVID deaths in the U.S. alone.
A horrific death toll, not just in this country, but across the globe, and certainly a cost that we've all paid who survived it, right, in the shutdowns to our life and seeing kids fall behind at school. I think one of the most important lessons is that we have to be investing now to be ready for the next public health crisis so that we have the tools to combat it, so we can invest in the technology for vaccines and the rest. But also we need leaders who are willing to prioritize keeping our kids in schools, keeping everyday life going while keeping us safe. It's not a small thing in the next crisis I hope we never experience, but it'll be a different kind of pathogen, I'm sure. We won't have the answers, but we have to be thinking constantly about how we can do best to keep people safe, keep our kids learning and moving forward, and keep people thriving in a place that might not be so safe if we have another thing like a COVID pandemic.
Mr. Shaffer.
Yeah, government in so many areas is far too reactive and not proactive. We need to be prepared. We need to have the research, we need to have the supplies, the PPE supplies, so that we're able to handle it, whatever that challenge may come. My wife's a medical doctor. I've seen firsthand how this has stressed out our medical community, how it's pushed us to the limits. We need to invest in our medical infrastructure. We need to invest in our healthcare infrastructure. And we also need to defend our freedoms. We went through this terrible pandemic, and many issues arose, with kids being put behind in schools, with people being forced to potentially get a vaccine or not against their will. Those are issues that we should be working out now so that we're not trying to decide that on the fly. When I was a township commissioner, we developed long-term plans for Ross Township. It wasn't in the area of pandemics, but it was in the area of what type of infrastructure do we need to replace? How do we plan ahead toward the future? We need to come together as a country, Republicans and Democrats, and say, what type of country do we want to be, and how do we prepare for that?
Mr. DeLuzio, just a quick follow-up on this. Did the government go too far? Not that the pandemic is over, but from the response that we've seen over the past couple of years, did the government response go too far in limiting personal freedom?
Look, I think the biggest mistake that I saw was we had kids being told they couldn't go to school, but bars were open. There were decisions that didn't make the right priorities. And frankly, knowing what we know now about what COVID was, how it was spread, we could have been creative in finding ways to keep kids in school at big outside tents, finding places in public parks or fields. We could have been creative in keeping our kids learning and keeping them safe in the pandemic. That's a lesson we have to have learned. And I know the pathogen may be different in a future pandemic, but we've got to prioritize protecting our most vulnerable and certainly making sure children don't fall behind.
Mr. Shaffer, 30 seconds.
Yes, the government went too far. It encroached on personal freedoms of individuals. The government really needs to respect the personal freedom and shouldn't have been forcing people to get vaccines. That's a choice that I made on my own, and that was my choice. But the government should not have made people choose between their job or getting a shot.
Thank you. John Shumway, next question.
Mr. Shaffer, the U.S. Supreme Court has rarely been so unpopular. In the year 2000, we're talking about 29% of the people who actually said they disapproved of how the High Court was operating. And that number has now gone to 55%. Some people say there should be more justices. Some people say there should be term limits. Some people say we should have a retirement age. Is reform necessary on the Supreme Court, and what would you do?
Yeah. We live in such a divisive age right now, such that the approval rating for a lot of our government institutions is at all-time lows. There is one institution that even has a lower approval rating than the Supreme Court, and that is the U.S. Congress. Sadly, I think some of the latest polls, only 15 to 20% of people approve of the job that Congress is doing. But I am a big believer in term limits. I'm a big believer in term limits for Congress. Here in the state of Pennsylvania, we do have age mandated retirements for our state Supreme Court justices. I do believe that that is something that we should look at. I would be in favor of having a similar thing. Look, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it's not good to have people who might be 90 years old who are getting to the point where they could have dementia or senility. Not to say that all older people have that, but there are people who are serving right now in Congress and that have shown signs of dementia. And that's something that should not be allowed. So I would be in favor of looking at doing an age limit. And that's not targeted at one party or another. That's just targeted at good government.
Mr. DeLuzio, your thoughts on this?
Look, I think I'm not surprised that we see poll after poll of waning confidence in the Supreme Court, of people not having that respect for the institution, not trusting them. They've undid decades of precedent in attacking Roe v. Wade and attacking reproductive freedom. They've been attacking workers' rights for a long time. So people are fed up, and frankly, we feel powerless. From the Citizens United decision that said unlimited corporate money can come flow through our politics, whether it's buying commercials or funding people on the ground, whatever the case may be. People have lost confidence and are continuing to lose confidence. I'm open to reform. I don't know what it'll look like. I think the idea of this life tenure for an unelected body that is dictating decisions around our daily lives, from reproductive freedom to gun safety and weighing in on all kinds of disputes, it's a problem. And it's a problem in the background of waning and dropping public faith in our courts. I say this as someone who's clerked for a Republican judge, where respect for the rule of law was paramount. We have to have that for our rule of law to succeed and for our government to succeed.
Mr. Shaffer, another 30 seconds.
Yeah, we need to make sure leaders in both parties need to be able to work together. Because in a democracy, the democracy will only function when people have trust in the system. We will get ourselves in a dangerous place when we are so divisive that one party or another, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans or the middle, loses trust in the system. We need leaders who will step up and work together, whether it's in the courts, whether it's in the legislature or the executive branch, to restore trust in our government and to move this country forward. And we can do that together.
Thank you. Lisa?
Our next topic is immigration, and the question will go first to Mr. DeLuzio. In recent weeks, we have seen migrants coming to this country, being placed on buses and planes and transported unannounced to cities like New York City and Martha's Vineyard. Do you agree with this practice, and what immigration policies would you introduce in Congress to help strengthen our borders, but also be respectful and humanely treat migrants arriving in the United States?
Thank you. I don't agree with the practice. It's political gamesmanship at the expense of really vulnerable people. The border ought to be secure. This administration and the last should have done a better job of getting that process more orderly for folks, having more security. I come to this as someone who has served and worn the uniform, understands what it is to care and prioritize safety and order. We have to do better. We need a better system for processing folks fleeing violence from places like Ukraine, seeking asylum, to be vetted, to make sure they can be here safely. And we need a process for folks who have been living in this country, paying their taxes, raising their families, following the rules, perhaps brought here as young children, to have some path to normalized status. I think there's bipartisan will and interest in doing exactly that. I think we can find Republicans and Democrats to get together to fix our immigration system, but it's not working. And it's got to be more secure, more orderly, and some way to provide a permanent status for folks.
Mr. Shaffer?
Look, the southern border is out of control. We just set a new record for the number of illegal people crossing the border. We need a multi-pronged approach. We need both parties to work together to solve this. It used to be that Republicans and Democrats agreed that we needed a border barrier, a wall, or some sort of blockade. Now, because of pressure from the far left, most Democrats have gotten scared and they don't support funding for a border wall. The people that my opponent, Chris DeLuzio, supports, AOC, Bernie Sanders, they're the reason this is going on. They want an open border, and that's what we are getting right now. We need a border wall. We also need checks at our employers to make sure that they actually enforce the rules that say you have to be an American citizen to get a job. And we need to solve this. Right now, Western Pennsylvania is suffering. This country is suffering. 300 people die every day due to drug overdoses. Most of those drugs are coming across, like fentanyl, across our open border. That's the equivalent of 2 737s crashing every day in this country. We need to get to the border secure and solve the problem.
Mr. Shaffer, very quickly, did you agree with that practice of
I think we need to, we need to get to the root cause. We need to prevent people from coming over. Unfortunately, there's a lot of political games on both sides going on. I do think it's kind of silly to take people, put them on a plane or a bus and send them somewhere, but it's also a cry of desperation that some of these border communities have to try to bring awareness to it. But I would not personally do that, no.
Okay, very quickly, Mr. DeLuzio.
So what's the question?
Just your rebuttal.
Oh, well, look, I think it is gamesmanship to throw people all over the country fleeing something coming across our border. We need more security and order at the border. And look, I don't need a lecture about what it is to care about public safety, to exhibit physical courage. I know what that's about from my time in uniform, and it's part of how we have to approach public safety in general, and certainly at our southern border.
Quick rebuttal, Mr.
No, look, a nation cannot exist if it cannot defend its borders. I don't even know why we have to have a debate about this in Congress. We need to secure our borders, and we need to revamp our immigration system into an immigration system that works for this country. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, I was there. I was a minority in my own department as an American citizen. There were people from all over the world that came to Carnegie Mellon, and a lot of them wanted to stay here and create jobs here. And we need to provide an immigration system that allows people that add value to this country to be able to be here and is based on a merit system.
And that's our time. Thank you.
Okay, time now for our candidates' closing statements. The order was determined earlier by coin toss. Mr. Shaffer, you go first, and you have 90 seconds.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's been an honor to be able to run for office here in Allegheny and Beaver County. Our country faces serious problems. We have a national debt that has just eclipsed $31 trillion. We have inflation that's approaching double digits, and it's forcing families to make tough choices between gas and groceries. And as winter approaches, people are acutely aware of the high energy prices that we need to heat our homes. Crime is rising in our communities, and it does not have to be this way. I have a proven record. I'm an engineer. I'm a bipartisan problem solver. I've won both primaries in the Democrat and Republican Party. I've served as president of Ross Township and the 33,000 people of that community. I've helped make our libraries better, our roads better. I was elected by a bipartisan majority there. We need people who will go to Congress, who will put partisanship aside, who will put the country over their party. That's something that I promise you that I will do. I will come home from Washington, D.C. I will look my 5 kids in the eye, and I will always say that I put the interests of our region and our country first. I've stood up to my own party before. I have no hesitation in doing it. I was born in the greatest country in the history of the world, and I've been blessed to live the American dream. I've risen from being born to teenage parents, to having to work hard my whole life, to being a success, to creating jobs, every single one of them right here in Western Pennsylvania. I'll fight for you, I'll fight for our region, and I'll fight for this country, and I ask for your vote on November 8th.
Thank you. Mr. DeLuzio, you now have 90 seconds.
Ken, thank you for a great debate, and Jeremy for sharing the stage with me. Now look, the values I learned growing up right here in Western Pennsylvania are the same ones my wife and I are teaching my young kids that drove me to devote my life to service, leading Americans in uniform in Iraq and at sea, fighting for our rights, what I'll do every day in Washington. And look, my opponent, he's made a fortune from a corporation building infrastructure in China. He wants to ban abortion, has been lying about it. He's not going to work for us. He'll work for right-wing extremists like Doug Mastriano, MAGA Republicans who've been bankrolling him and supporting him in this race. He's not going to stand up to the corporations who've been gouging us, shipping our jobs overseas. I believe in something very different. We gotta be fighting to bring down costs, to make stuff right here again, to have strong union jobs, to stand up to our economic foes in China, not coddling them. I'm proud to be the union-backed candidate, to be the guy standing on this stage, standing up for workers, not big corporations. We've got to protect our rights, women's freedom to make their own choices, and our democracy and the Constitution that I swore an oath to defend after 9/11. These are the Western PA values I learned. They drive me. They're why I'm running and asking to represent you, because I believe deeply in this country and was willing to risk my life for all of us. So I hope you'll vote for me, and know this, when I'm your congressman, I'll always put you, your families, and this country first. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. On behalf of all of us at KDKA-TV, thanks so much to the candidates, and thank you for joining us for this debate. And thanks again to our political editor, John Delano, who's under the weather. John, speedy recovery. I'm Ken Rice. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the news.